This is a download from BFM 89.9, the business station.
This is Tech Talk, made possible by TM1.
It's Tech Talk and it's Fun Friday. My name is Jeff Sandhu. We tend to race through topics here on MSP, so today we're taking a brief pause to look back over some of the material we've covered so far in 2019. Matt, this is a show about the future, so surely looking back is the opposite of what we should be doing.
Hey, Jeff. Well, I guess I suddenly realized that, it's June already and we're already kind of nearly halfway through 2019. And I can't speak for the listeners, but I've still got that mindset that it's the beginning of the year.
Or at least just a couple of months in.
Yeah, exactly. And that 2019 is still going to unfold before us. But I guess the simple fact is that a lot of the year has actually already unfolded.
Has it been a busy year?
It's kind of felt that way. I mean, again, I don't know if it's just me, but for the past couple of years, I felt that the stories have kind of been flying by faster than we can cover them all. Certainly issues with technology companies have been blowing up left, right and center. And we seem to have reached this point where we have all this kind of magnificent game-changing technology, but our systems to cope with it, whether they're regulatory, financial, social, or even just having the time, it's all kind of creaking.
You mean Facebook and the social media companies?
Well, I think it's probably a bit more than that. So, yeah, we have all that negative stuff coming out of those companies. We have them exploiting us for profit and being less than transparent about how they operate and how they treat our personal data. So, of course, that's a huge story. But we also have the rising costs of technology, which are partly down to economics, but also, I don't know, it just seems to be partly down to profiteering.
But isn't this part of the game?
It is, but I think a lot of people are more market savvy now. We're staring down at the world's largest companies every time we go online. You look at your phone screen and you see a logo on there. You look at your computer, you see all of these logos when you actually get online. And we know what kind of profits that these companies are making. And we can see that the rate of innovation is slowing. And of course, anyone like me who's still daft enough to be an Apple customer, you're probably feeling it the most. We don't get excited when Apple release new products anymore. We just get stressed because the newest product is basically going to be a little bit better than the one you already have, but probably vastly more expensive. Yet Apple sits on what is referred to in the media as a war chest of cash. To the outsider, it looks as though it's, almost a siege mentality.
The new iPod Touch that was re-released after how many years? And it's using parts of like 4 years ago and stuff, but $399.
But exactly, that's precisely what I mean.
But because they're afraid of their own consumers?
I don't know what it is, but you do wonder what they're preparing for, because certainly we're not seeing huge technological leaps at this point. We're seeing, wearables and bezel-less screens, innovation that the word meh was literally invented for. So you can understand why people are heading away from the traditional big names for companies like OnePlus. The devices are great and they're way, way cheaper. And when you look at some of the big established brands and their mid-level and budget phones and tablets and laptops, you wonder why anyone would chase the high end when the flagship devices can be 2, 3, or even 5 times the price of... these devices, they're not just perfectly capable, they are powerful devices. So the entry-level devices, you just cannot understand why people are paying the premium.
But it's not all negative today, is it?
No, we do get tripped up. These shows shouldn't be negative. We should be spending more time on the kind of life-affirming aspects of all this innovation. So we did a show a couple of weeks ago about all the crazy and cool stuff that scientists and inventors are coming up with, all the breakthroughs and discoveries, all the stuff that we're finding out about space, to which end we will be doing a monthly show on all this kind of smiley innovation stuff, probably the last show of each month. So today I think it's a great opportunity to say, slow down. We're halfway through 2019. Let's remind ourselves of some of the stuff we've covered so far this year before we kind of accelerate off into the future again.
All right, so if you had to sum up an overarching theme for this year, what would it be?
I think it would be the idea of asking questions. Last year we talked a lot about power and power balance, who has the power, and that the tech companies spend a lot of time trying to convince us to follow their rules and their way of thinking. And we forget that they need us more than we need them. So we are starting to see that power balance shift certainly in the consumer market.
You mean the rise of companies like OnePlus then?
Well, yeah, before all the political hullabaloo, it looked like Huawei was on track to be the biggest global player in consumer electronics, which is astonishing for a company that few people outside China would have even been able to name sort of 5 or 6 years ago. Consumers have always been voting with their wallets, and it's not surprising. Rather than empowering us, it feels that over the last few years, technology has been doing its best to relieve us of our money increment by increment. But in a way, they're trying to do it at exactly the wrong time. Many of us are now fearful for the long-term, even the medium-term prospects of the jobs we have. We feel less secure. We feel less wealthy. And technology opens up this giant menu of additional stuff that we feel that we have to buy.
Like subscription services.
Exactly that. I mean, we're currently planning a future episode of the show where we look at the dozens of fees we can end up paying for everything from TV streaming to document storage. And then there are the apps that we spend $1 or $2 on and then use once or twice and forget we have them.
Yep.
We see the rise of QR codes and e-wallets, which make it even easier to make all of these micropayments. And the result is this steady trickle. It's like a stream that you barely notice, but it ends up being this river gushing out of your bank account at the end of every month.
If that's the case, shouldn't we be glad that so many online services are actually free?
And that's where we come back to this idea of asking questions. People are starting to realize that free services come with a lot of strings, and the strings being the ability to manipulate what we see and how companies talk to us and about us. So they're a bit like that person who pretends to be your best friend and then gleefully shares all your secrets and fears with the world as soon as your back's turned. That's kind of our relationship with a lot of these social media and other services that we subscribe to. I was in Macau a couple of weeks ago giving a talk to a group of market researchers. And what impressed me was the discussions they were having about morality and privacy.
Wouldn't you expect them to be talking about the opposite, to get as much information as possible out of people in as many situations as possible?
Well, exactly. You'd expect them to be pedaled to the floor. Instead, we were actually hearing discussions about restraint. We were hearing about quality of data, but also these are people who understand the implications of data and its value. And you can't forget that they're consumers as well. Their data also gets scooped up by companies and services, but also because they are an insights industry. So they're responsive when it comes to consumer shifts and trends. So they're picking up on this restlessness and restiveness from ordinary folks as well.
The idea that we're pricing our data, our own value too cheaply?
Yeah, and this idea that we're flexing our muscles as well. There's certainly a lot of incivility online, and we're finding that social media and search algorithms often prioritize content that has an incendiary or abrasive edge. But I am heartened, I guess, that we're realizing that we have that power, especially people who aren't in my kind of aging Gen X or your rapidly aging millennial age group. A group of savvy digital natives who are running rings around the bots and the spiders, who share intimate content beyond the reach of these companies in closed networks and post sanitized performance or publicity shots on their public networks.
I think we were discussing that in episode 69, the technology that works for us.
Everything has become a bit skewed, and that's more of a problem for us because, we feel trapped in the system. But we designed the system. We decided we didn't want to pay for stuff and we'd let whatever shady company peer into our personal lives for information. So we have a generation of kids who grew up disabling the parental content controls that we thought were infallible.
They were infallible because we didn't know how to disable them.
Yeah, that's where it comes to that generational thing. I remember trying to explain to this guy in a Mac store, he was about my age, and he was trying to decide whether to buy a laptop or a tablet for his 3-year-old son. And me and the shop assistant were trying to explain to him that even though it had less power and functionality, the tablet was the safer bet because it would be easier to control content access and lock it down. he couldn't grasp that his 3-year-old would probably be able to bypass any restrictions on a laptop in about 30 seconds, because those tools, those pieces of software looked impenetrable to him from his generational standpoint, although they'd be pretty much invisible to his son.
Do you think we've lost the battle about technology working for our generation?
I mean, I don't think it really matters. I think our generation is largely irrelevant to this part of the tech debate. You know, we have an entire generation that knows how to disappear from the radar when they feel like it. And the tech industry is focusing all its power on ways to reach those guys.
All right. When we come back, we'll take a short break. More retrospective futurism. BFM 89.9.
You're listening to Tech Talk, made possible by TM1.
Backing female ministers. BFM 89.9, the business station.
You're listening to Tech Talk, made possible by TM1.
And we're back. My name is Jeff Sandhu, together with Culture Pop's Matt Armitage. Before the break, we were talking about who technology should be working for. We were talking about the ability of post-millennial generations having the ability to disappear from the radar, as you put it. Matt, didn't we also on, I think, episode 68, devote an entire episode to saying these would be the first generations to be tracked digitally from birth until death? So how can you have both? A generation that's tracked but can stop from being tracked when they feel like it?
I'm not sure if you're completely aware of your role on this show. You're supposed to actually help with the smoke and mirrors that disguise the flaws in my logic, not to actively draw attention to it. Luckily, you've chosen an example where I can actually defend myself. This is a generation that is more adept at staying off the radar of private companies in terms of the details they share about their lives. However, they are still subject to this increasing metadata tracking that all of us are falling prey to.
Like where we go or who we meet or the intersections of data streams rather than explicitly saying who we're with and what we're doing.
Yeah, you know, you might not say that you're going to the mall with friends, but it stands to reason that if you and a bunch of other people are captured on CCTV and RFID scanners standing in a store looking at sodas at exactly the same time, the chances are you're all going to be friends, especially if you then all continue on to another store or walk around in the same group. You know, AI is helping us to extrapolate a lot more information from data we assume is anonymous and not connected to anything else, because those intersection points give away a lot more information than we tend to think. And we spend our entire lives online. So those devices and apps are sending literally hundreds of thousands of pings a week back to Google and Facebook and Amazon's web services.
And I think we touched on that, episode 66, Never Gonna Give You Up, where we talked about how hard is it to cut the technology, the big technology companies out of your life.
Or rather, we talked about Gizmodo Writer Cash Hill's attempt to live without big tech. Yes, it was way too much of a scary endeavor for me to try out. But that's one of the reasons we keep coming back to this idea of asking more and more questions, because we forget how much of our lives are connected to the cloud. And I'm not just talking about the devices we own that are connected, things we take for granted, like the payment systems in stores or the back ends of the companies we work in. All of these services link back to that same handful of companies like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. And this enormous data trail can then be combined with all of that personal information.
Which makes it impossible to disconnect.
Pretty much. I think we did a show last year, episode 31, Amazon's Age of Empire, which highlights the enormity and the scope of what a company like Amazon could do.
Which hooks back to episode 63, We Are the Robots, where we discuss the rise of surveillance capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, Never Gonna Give You Up and We Are the Robots are two of my favorite episodes of this year so far. So if you have missed those, go back and listen to them. You know, we've done a bunch of shows this year that come back to this idea of a system training us to be more like machines. Yeah. We've talked about things like China's social credit system, which is now being looked at by governments across the world. Now, it has been framed as an overreaching surveillance tool, but there are plenty of governments, even in the supposedly democratic world, who are looking for overreaching surveillance tools, especially as we're in this age where pesky citizens can say anything they want about those governments and publish it without someone in authority approving it first.
I think we based that episode on the book of Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff.
Yeah, we were looking at the last 20 years of tech as being this enormous kind of theoretical land grab, a bit like the rush to explore the Wild West of the US in the mid to late 19th century. And it's one of those situations where there are no real rules or laws, so the winners get to define the terms. We take it for granted that tech companies are allowed to behave in certain ways and use our information in those ways because they've told us they have the right to do that.
Yep.
It's interesting because those younger generations we're talking about, they were born into a world where tech companies were establishing these ideas that they own our data, that monopolies are natural, that disruption is the defining business philosophy. They think these things are norms. And it's a bit like, the he said, she said discussions that we have about privacy.
What, that we tell the tech companies that they need to respect our privacy and protect our data more carefully?
Yeah, and they tell us absolutely it's priority number one, and they list the things that they've done to stop their competitors from accessing and listing your data, while also telling us that this ensures our information is only given to the trustworthy companies that contract their services. So again, that issue about asking questions, annoying people and figuring out who has your information and why, because many of the bigger tech companies now have more surveillance muscle and power than a lot of governments do. So it's great that your messaging app is encrypted so securely that neither the CIA or the FSB can hack into it. But what good is it if an intern at the Shady Data Corporation, Inc. can type username, user, and password 1234 into a login box and is connected to your phone's camera as you sit in the bathroom stall?
Can they do that?
I mean, I hope not. That's a fairly extreme example. Yeah. But then you see vulnerabilities like the ability to hack into WhatsApp using a simple missed call. So you start to wonder, how strongly are these services protected? And as a user of a free service, what exactly are my rights? So when it comes to surveillance capitalism, the fewer legal rights you have beyond whatever your service provider decides to put in a EULA, the better it is for them.
I thought you said that today wasn't going to be completely miserable.
Well, we did talk about clean meat in episode 73, a revolution in biotechnology that's allowing us to look at realistic meat substitutes for the first time. We looked at both the lab-grown, which freaks people out, and the plant-based. So I thought that was pretty much a feel-good show. But certainly, I think we've had a bit more focus this year on some of the things that science is doing to improve our lives, especially when it comes to repurposing technologies that we've known for maybe thousands of years.
You mean episode 71, Superwood?
Yeah, I think that was one of the ones I did with Richard Bradbury while you were away. I'm sure you listened to it, though. Okay, rude. Good job I don't take these things to heart. We're constantly looking for stronger, renewable and eco-friendly building materials, especially as we have this addiction to concrete, which is not only fueling emissions, it's helping to make our towns and cities less responsive to the climate changes that are resulting.
And wood is the answer to that.
Well, these scientifically enhanced superwoods that are as strong as steel and much, much lighter. So trees are a great way to soak up carbon. So rather than cut them down and burn them and replace them with concrete, sustainably grow them, harvest them and use them for construction. They're already being used in towers, but probably their greatest use is in low-rise prefabs that can be made off-site and quickly bolted together.
Franken meat and smart twigs. That's your idea of an upbeat ending?
Well, look, we've looked at the positive case of all this data and privacy stuff as well. MSP85, we looked at Utopia for Idealists. You're right, it is easy to see the negative side of all these changes, especially as those are the ones that tend to fill our feeds. So we've had a look at some of the best case scenarios as well, how data can be used to improve our lives, to actually secure more privacy, to give us more job security and wealth and independence, to build better towns and cities, to give us energy independence, to cheapen healthcare and medicine, and of course, how AI can be used to check our worst impulses, rather than to magnify them.
Because those are the choices.
Yeah, because, asking questions is also about knowing what kind of world or society you want to build. It's about telling your elected representatives that it's not okay that they don't know that Android can't run on an iPhone. And it's about remembering that the world you want and the world I want won't be the same thing. I mean, mine won't have children in it, for one thing. I think I'm the only person who didn't think the movie Children of Men was dystopian. That was like Disneyland for me. And that it's all right for the world not to be the same thing. Social media has made us forget that not everyone thinks the same as us. And that's something we should embrace rather than run from. Extremism starts to take over when you think and act as though everyone else believes what you believe. Society lies somewhere else, hopefully somewhere a little closer to the middle, even in the future.
All right, that's a look back at some of the greatest bits of 2019 so far. We've mentioned a couple of previous shows, and go and check it out. You can also find the transcripts of the show on culturepop.com. We'll be right back with Geek Squawks after this. BFM 89.9.
Tech Talk, made possible by TM1. To learn more, visit tm1.com.my.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To find more great interviews, go to bfm.my or find us on iTunes. BFM 89.9, the business station.